Who is Richard Horace?
My ex-boyfriend.
And you were dating Mr. Horace in roughly 2018 until 2021, something like that?
Objection, relevant.
Sustained.
How long were you dating Mr. Horace?
Objection, relevant.
Sustained.
Did you spend time with Mr. Horace after the date, after April 23rd, 2017?
Objection,
Yes.
relevant.
I have to be able to ask.
I said the objection is overruled.
Thank you, Judge. So you spent time with Mr. Horace after the offense day of April 23rd, 2017, right?
Correct.
And it was a lot of time, correct?
Correct.
You actually at one point moved to Houston to be with Mr. Horace, correct?
Correct.
And during that time period, you discussed aspects of this case and your involvement. Do you recall that?
No.
Did you tell Mr. Horace that
Objection, calls for hearsay, both hearsay and improper impeachment.
it's not improper impeachment? Under 613, I have to confront her with the substance of her prior statement.
Objection is sustained.
Oh, we're going to take a vote in a second. Hold on. You testified a moment ago that Mark knew that there would be men in the car with you, correct?
Correct.
But that is not what you told Mr. Horace, is it?
Objection, hearsay.
Be overruled.
That is not what you told Mr. Horace, is it?
I never told him anything besides that I had a case.
Okay. You never told Mr. Horace that you intended to get Mark to come for the photo shoot along with you?
No, sir.
Now, you testified previously that you did not know Mark except as an acquaintance on Instagram, correct?
Correct.
But that's not what you told Mr. Horace, is it?
That is not true.
You've told Mr. Horace that you've known Mark since high school, right?
No, sir. I knew him because of high school. He was older than us.
That's what I'm asking. Because of high school, you knew of him?
Of him, correct.
And you also told Mr. Horace that he had tried to violate you on a prior occasion, correct?
No, I did not.
And you also told Mr. Horace that you didn't tell Mr. McIntyre or any of the other people in the car about this past interaction with Mark before getting in the car with him that day to pick him up, right?
No, sir.
And you also didn't tell Mr. McIntyre or anybody else that you secreted a gun underneath your seat in the car when you went to go pick him up that day, right?
That is not true.
You also didn't tell Mr. Horace that when he got in the car, you told everybody in the car about the fact that Mark was a pornographer and that he had done creepy things and that he had tried to do creepy things with you while you were in high school, right?
I never said that.
And you also didn't tell anybody in the car, well, let me back up. You told Mr. Horace that when Mark told you that the photo shoot was called off, there was a demand to look into Mark's backpack to see if he really was a photographer, right?
No, sir.
And you told Mr. Horace that when you looked into the backpack and there was an examination of this camera, that you found child pornography in it, right?
Objection,
No, sir.
objection, relevant. Can we
Sustained.
approach, please?
Yes, you may approach.
Y'all step outside. Remember the court's previous instructions, all right? Y'all can step back. All right, everyone, please be seated. All right, defense. The state filed a motion in limine defense, you were aware of the state's motion in limine, and I informed both parties, either side, if you have a motion in limine, before you enter into any territory that's the subject of the motion in limine, that you approach. And the reason why I do that is because, as both parties know, I do not know what the evidence is in your case. I don't know any facts of the case. I'm hearing this case as the jury is hearing it. And in the state's motion in limine, on page 2, it states, the state requests that the court grant this motion in limine and instruct the defense counsel to approach the bench and present the proposed evidence outside the presence of the jury before voir dire, opening statement, questioning, or in any matter bringing any witness or evidence of any of the following matters. And the number one thing says, any crimes, wrongs, or bad acts of the victim, Mark Anthony Saldivar. So, defense, it appears to the court that you violated the motion in limine, unless you're trying to tell the court that possession of child pornography is not a bad act. The question is whether or not you were aware of the motion in limine, which you were, and whether or not you violated it in regards to violation of condition number 1. What you're trying to do with the witness, and excuse me, I'm going to have the witness step down, and counsel, you'll take your client to the back. You're still under oath and the rule has been invoked. And what I can tell you, unless you have some photos of child pornography that you're saying that the complainant had, then you're just throwing questions out and you're violating the motion in limine. It clearly states that you all are supposed to approach. Now, unless you all think that child pornography is not a bad act, then I don't know why that's a crime. Because if you're saying it's not a bad act, you asked this witness a question and it involved child pornography. Did I hear that incorrectly?
You heard that correctly, Your Honor, and I'd like to also make aware to the court yesterday when we approached about my motion in limine, the court specifically regurgitated condition number 1 to defense in regards to the nude photos.
Your Honor, I understand that the court is of the opinion we violated the motion.
No, not of the opinion. You violated the motion in limine. The motion in limine says that you are to approach before questioning or in any matter bringing any witness or evidence of any of the following matters. Any crimes, wrongs, or bad acts of the victim, Mark Anthony Saldivar. And you're asking this witness about whether or not he had child pornography or something in his camera. The court considers that a bad act.
Your Honor, to be clear, the questioning of the witness is intended to establish whether or not she previously made these statements. They're not being offered under Rule 613 for their truth. They're being offered for what she said to another individual.
You are still, what you're questioning her about is a bad act that she said that was the bad act of the complainant. And that's a motion in limine. And you all should approach before you do that. You violated the motion. The court is finding that you violated the motion in limine. And the only question now is how is that corrected? Because nobody approached the court to say, I'm going to start asking questions that is related to number 1 to the state's motion in limine.
I understand the court's ruling. I've given my explanation for it. As far as the remedy is concerned, the court will do as it sees fit.
Oh, no, I am. But you're still, it appears to court, acting as though you haven't violated number 1, and you have. You violated that motion in limine.
Your Honor,
And I can tell you, yes, counsel?
I think we're slightly, we understand the court's ruling. However, I do want the record to reflect, at least, that what we're asking is what the witness's previous statement. We are not accusing anybody of anything, and we're certainly not trying to accuse Mark, and we will be happy to explain to the jury.
It's still a violation of the motion in limine. Hypothetically, if somebody were to ask for it, any defendant, not just your defendant, if somebody were to ask a witness on the stand, hey, by the way, and didn't you tell somebody else that the defendant had possession of child pornography, the defense will be objecting because it's a violation of the motion in limine. It's a violation of the motion in limine in fact and in spirit.
Well, it is intended because this witness gave a number of prior statements. One to a police officer during an interrogation, which was video recorded. Another under oath before another judge in a different court.
But here's the thing: it doesn't matter to the court. What matters to the court is that it's a bad act, and all you all had to do was approach the court. I would have heard it, what you are seeking to get from this witness, and I would have made a ruling on it. But instead, you have people who are violating rules, and I'm finding you violated the motion in limine rule. It's not supposed to be brought up until it's brought up to the court outside the presence of the jury. Now, what you have done is by bringing this up, I don't know if the jury's going to believe he was in possession of child pornography or not. I don't know if he was in possession of child pornography or not, because nothing has been presented to the court, and all you all had to do was approach the court and say, Your Honor, I believe we're going to go into number one of the state's motion in limine. And you know what I would have done? I would have had the jury step out, and I would have said, okay, what's the issue here? And you would have told me that, and I would have made a ruling.
I believe this came up yesterday.
No,
Yes.
not the possession of child pornography.
The question of photographs on the camera of
nudes.
right.
That's it, of nudes. And when we were here at the bench, I even told the state, okay, he has nude photos, allegedly. I said, how is that necessarily bad act?
I see.
And both parties said, yes. Mr. Hunter, yes, Judge, you're right, it's not a bad act. And then we go a step further today, and now it's possession of child pornography. And I'm not going to allow you all to ask that question, and I'm going to instruct the jury to disregard.
We understand, Your Honor.
We understand. And there are some additional matters that she spoke of that have.
And what would that be?
Your Honor, I don't believe that any other bad acts or potential bad acts of Mark Anthony Saldivar will be discussed other than those things which were discussed in opening statement related to the.
I'll determine whether it comes in or not. And you know why I'm going to determine whether it comes in or not? Because there was a state's motion in limine that says any crimes, wrongs, or bad acts of the victim, Mark Anthony Saldivar, you're approached beforehand. And I need to make a ruling on whether or not it's relevant and whether or not it should be admissible. That's me. That's my job.
I understand your.
So what other acts or what other bad acts that you feel, crimes, wrongs, or bad acts of the victim, Mark Anthony Saldivar, that you feel this witness is going to be questioned about?
I can tell the court that it's going to be, and I don't know if it'll be disputed or not, that he damaged the vehicle. I guess that could be considered a bad act. I want to.
Well, with regards to the damage of the vehicle, allegedly, it said that he put his foot through the glass of the vehicle. That's a part of this whole alleged offense and the offense date. So, counsel, you all know that if there's evidence that's going to come in that he damaged the windshield, that's already in through other people.
Right, and the issue of what she said with respect to that to our client, she says that she didn't say anything, that she looked straight ahead, didn't look to the side.
All right, so here.
May I just finish?
We're getting off track. We're with the bad acts.
Well, I'm going to suggest that she has told people, and I believe if she says that's correct, that I never said anything other than that to Mr. McIntyre, part of the race test of the offense. If she said something other than what she told the police officer, I believe that's a prior inconsistent statement or entitled to ask her about
Here's
it.
the thing, I'm
It
not
has nothing
challenging,
to do with
I'm not challenging,
pornography, sex, anything else.
counsel, I'm not challenging anyone on inconsistent statements.
Okay.
I'm not challenging anybody on that. The court knows the rules of evidence. What I am saying is there's a motion in limine. And I think it's safe to say for the people who have been practicing even a year that you know you're not supposed to violate motions in limine. And number two, if there's an alleged offense and videos have been shown in exhibits that it's alleged to be, or maybe the jury feels it's already been established that the person who kicked in a window or damaged a window of a vehicle is the complainant because witnesses have said it's the complainant who did that. So you all know questioning the witness about that, that's really not about the motion in limine. The motion in limine is about your co-counsel violating it.
My able co-counsel, I can tell you if I can get 5 seconds, I believe he will go into next the matter of what was said that precipitated the fight.
All right, let me
And
just-
I don't think it's about anything, and I think we're entitled to ask the witness.
Let me just tell you.
Yeah.
You violated the motion in limine.
We got that.
You will not ask this witness any questions about child pornography on a camera unless you have
We agree.
proof that there's child pornography on a camera.
Well, by the way, we do have proof of that,
Mhm.
and it was a legitimate question. However, for the court's ruled on it. That's not what I'm discussing. I'm talking about what we're going to do next. And while I can't look into his mind, I presume since the court has ruled on it, we can make a bill later, but we're not going to do anything in front of the jury. However, I do believe conversation, what she tells the police officer, what she tells the judge, if there's somebody that says you said something else, I believe that's fair game, that's impeachment. And all I don't want to do is, we shouldn't have to have the hearing like this before we ask every question.
No.
And if it doesn't involve child pornography or some extraneous offense, I think we're
No,
entitled.
you all have to have a hearing because it's a part of their motion in limine.
Not
you can't
if it's
just-
not an offense.
Here's,
or
yes,
misconduct.
and the last time I checked, possession of child
I would
pornography
agree.
is an offense.
And we're going to be chastised and the court's going to do something.
Oh, no, my chastisement is just stating the law. There's a motion in limine in place and the defense has violated.
I wouldn't be.
And I am not going to allow you to ask questions about child pornography.
We're not going to do that based on the court's ruling.
Let's
However,
bring the
we
jury
should be
Your
able
Honor,
to.
just in anticipation, the only other aspects of this questioning that I believe will venture into territory that the state might object to would be questioning about whether or not she had a hand in getting the gun into Mr. McIntyre's hands, if that is in fact what happened. And secondly, whether or not she is the source of the marijuana, which I'm not clear on.
All right, so here's the thing. This is, and let me just tell you, this is what I'm going to say this.
She was asked that.
This is what I'm going to say, and I want you all to listen to me clearly. Both sides have been practicing law for more than 2 seconds. Everyone here knows that if you're asking questions and those questions are related to what's already been brought in evidence, the marijuana, it's already in there. It's already in the evidence. Who had it, what they did with it. Yeah, you can ask questions about that.
And gun.
The gun, it's already there. But I don't want any deflections where people are pretending as though they don't know that they violated the motion in limine. So I'm bringing the jury back in and I'm telling them to disregard the last question. I'm telling them to disregard any testimony or questions about child pornography. Does everyone, and the defense, you violated the motion in limine. Oh, if you could have your witness take the stand, please.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness was not in the courtroom while those discussions were happening?
Yes. Just 1 second, they're gonna bring the witness back in. All right, you can bring this to your stand.
All right, for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. And could I have counsel approach? All right, ladies and gentlemen, the last question that mentioned the word child pornography, totally disregard that question. Does everyone understand? Is everyone able to do that?
Yes.
You are not to consider it for anything. You are to totally disregard it. But if an answer to the question was made, you are to totally disregard that answer as well. Does everyone understand?
Yes.
Is everyone able to do that?
Yes.
All right, defense, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Reyes, you said that you didn't see anything other than the condoms that were shown to you, correct? In terms of the contents of his backpack?
Correct.
But you told the detective that there was a roll of condoms, lube, and a new outfit in the backpack, correct?
That's what TAYMOR said.
Okay, and you believe that, right?
No, I didn't believe anything.
You didn't tell the detective you didn't believe it.
He asked me what was in the bag, and I said what was said to me.
So when you explained it, you were explaining it in terms of what someone else told you, not in terms of what you believed to be in the bag?
Correct.
I'm gonna call your attention to this segment of your statement.
And he was like, give me all your shit, this and that, and then, so the guy doesn't want to give him his stuff. And I was just like, what are you doing? And then he was just like, just shut up. And he was like, give me your stuff. And then they started pulling the backpack away from him. And then that's when they opened it and saw all that stuff.
So what was in the bag?
There was a roll of condoms, a lube, a bottle of lube, and a brand new outfit.
Hey, Judge, sorry, just for the purposes of the record, what portion was that? I don't know.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. The DLC player numbers.
I believe that's at 1641.
1641. Thank you.
So when Mark gets in the car, he says, in your words, he wanted to reschedule the photo shoot, right?
Correct.
But you proceeded to drive away from his house anyway.
He asked me for a ride to North Star.
Okay,
Correct.
and that obviously caused confusion in the car, correct?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
When he told everyone in the car that he was going to have to reschedule the photo shoot, there was a question in the car as to whether or not he was even a photographer, right?
Objection.
No, sir.
Hearsay.
That would be oral.
And that was when the demand was made to see the inside of the backpack, correct?
No, sir.
And it's then that the men found condoms and lube in the backpack, right?
I never saw it.
And again, Mr. McIntyre was your boyfriend at the time, right?
He said I was his girlfriend.
Okay. You weren't dating Mr. McIntyre at all? That you don't recall your testimony from yesterday?
But he would call me his girlfriend.
Okay. You were dating him, right?
So he says.
Okay. You dispute that now?
I always said I was never wanting to date him.
Okay. Do you recall your testimony yesterday?
Yes,
And you recall saying that you were his girlfriend yesterday?
yes.
Okay. So when they find the lube and the condoms in the backpack, that's when a physical altercation breaks out, right?
I never saw it, but yes.
And that's when you handed TAYMOR a gun, right?
No,
And that's what you told Mr. Horace, correct?
no.
And eventually, as the struggle continued, that was when eventually Mark was ejected from the car. He was thrown out of the car, right?
I asked them to let him go after they were beating him.
And when we talk about they, Jalen Bell and Jeremiah Rodriguez were in the backseat of the car with Mark, right?
Correct.
They were the ones who had the easiest access to hit Mark, right?
So did TAYMOR.
Okay, so you described that Mark would have been sitting directly behind TAYMOR, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And so when Mark gets out of the car, he jumps on the hood of the car, right?
not immediately.
Right, he tries the doors to get back in first, correct?
Correct,
And then when that doesn't work, he jumps on the hood of the car.
correct.
And while he's on the hood of the car, he begins to stomp the windshield, right?
Once we were in the Chick-fil-A parking lot, when TAYMOR told me to drive the car back and forth so
Objection,
I could get him
non-responsive.
off,
Overruled.
You finish the question. Answer.
that's when he smashed the windshield.
Okay. And he was kicking the windshield, right?
He kicked it once.
And you said he was kicking the windshield at you, correct?
He kicked it once.
I'm asking you, have you said previously that he kicked it at you?
I don't know who he was kicking it at.
Okay. All right, ma'am, I'm going to call your attention to roughly minute 7:05. Interview.
I'm gonna tell you everything. I mean, waiting for this really. But what happened was the guy that I had well, TAYMOR, he messaged him through Instagram because he wanted us to get so that's what we're messaging about. Then TAYMOR would take my phone and he would talk to him. Like TAYMOR had my phone the whole entire time. I barely, anyway, so one day he was just like, okay, we're gonna go pick him up so we can have our photo shoot. I said, okay. So we went and we went and picked him up. He asked me if I could just give him a ride to North Star, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And so we were going, and out of nowhere, we were at a stoplight, and TAYMOR takes our gun and tells him to give him everything. I didn't know this was gonna happen. I swear on everything, I didn't know this was gonna happen. And they all just started fighting, and I read the light, and I'm like, I don't know what to do, and I was like, please just let him out, and they're pushing him out. And he came out to grab his backpack and opened it and took out everything inside of it. And what we found was a roll of condoms, a bottle of lube, and a whole brand new outfit. So he was like, just get him out of the car, So they were pushing him out of the car, and he was like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And he was trying to get back in the car, and they were trying to push him back out. And the light was still red the whole entire time. And I was just there, like, I don't know what to do. And TAYMOR was just like, shut up. And then I was just like, okay. And I was just at the wheel. And then they were pushing him out again. The lights finally turned green. I was like, okay, it's my chance to get away from this dude. So, and then he jumps on my hood. And I was like, oh my God, what do? And I still didn't know what to do. Tamar was like, keep driving. And he went to the back, he was like, keep driving. And I was like, no. I was like, I was gonna be on the highway, so I gave it away. And he was like, no. He was like, pull over somewhere. So I pulled over and it happened to be Chick-fil-A. And the guy was just kept stopping on my hood and everything. I was trying to back up so he could get off my car. And I didn't know what to do. Like, I really was just going back and forth because I didn't know what to do. And then the guy said something and he tried kicking me through the windshield, and then that's what Tamar did that.
What did he do?
He shot him.
So you told the detective that he was kicking at you through the windshield, right?
Correct.
And you also told the detective that you said we found condoms and lube in the backpack, right?
I said that, but I never saw it myself, and I made that clear afterwards.
And in the course of that, roughly slightly after 8 minutes and 25 seconds into it, you say the phrase, and he pointed the gun at you. And I just want to get a sense of this. During the exchange, when Mark is on the hood of the car stomping, you told everybody in the car that you thought he had a gun, right?
No,
That's what you told Mr. Horace, though, right?
no, I didn't.
And that you were yelling, he's got a gun.
No, I did not.
That's when TAYMOR shot him, right?
No,
You originally indicated that you didn't know whether anyone had a gun in the car when you got in the car that day, right? You remember telling the detective that?
I said that Taymor and Jalen always carried it.
Okay, so you don't remember telling the detective that you didn't know anyone had a gun when you got in?
No,
And then later in the interview, you're asked about what gun Jalen Bell was carrying, and you specifically told the detective he was carrying a 9mm, right?
yes, that's what he always carried.
After the shooting, as you're driving away, Jalen Bell had the backpack, right?
I don't know who had the backpack.
And you know that it was Jalen Bell who threw Mark's cell phone out of the car, correct?
So he said,
Okay, you didn't believe that?
I never saw it.
Did you tell the detective that Jalen threw the phone out of the window?
Correct.
And you know that it was Jalen who went through the wallet. I believe you testified to that fact yesterday, correct?
Correct.
Now, I want to get something clear. You testified that Mark got into the car with a backpack and a camera. You recall saying that?
Correct.
Was the camera in the backpack or was it separate from the backpack?
I never saw.
You never saw a camera,
I knew he had a camera. He's a photographer.
but you say you didn't see it.
I didn't see if it was outside the bag or in the bag.
Okay. What's in Ector County? Odessa?
Yes.
What's there?
Objection relevant.
What's the relevancy?
She was apprehended in Ector County.
Alright, objection sustained.
Where did you go? Where were you when you were arrested for this?
Odessa.
Okay. Why did you go to Odessa?
Objection relevant.
Overruled.
Kayla's friend took me over there.
Okay. Which friends?
Deja and Keon.
Okay. They gave you a ride?
Yes.
Did you have any family there?
No.
Do you have any connections there?
No.
Okay. After this incident, and after Taymor and Jalen left Jeremiah's house, you never saw Taymor again, right?
No, only through FaceTime.
Okay. But you often told others that you were unable to get a hold of Taymor on FaceTime, right?
Not true.
Okay. You weren't upset that Taymor wasn't responding to you or answering your phone calls?
Not at all.
You remember that you were at one point concerned that you might be pregnant and you were trying to reach him and you couldn't get a hold of him?
No, they were manipulating me to think that I was.
Okay. You're referring to who when you say they?
Kayla and his dad.
Okay. You don't remember the night that Desiree found out she was pregnant?
Objection relevant.
It goes directly to what she's testifying to.
Sustain.
Do you not remember telling Desiree and Kayla that you thought you were pregnant?
No.
You don't remember Kayla and Desiree encouraging you to take a pregnancy test so you'd know one way or the other?
Kayla made me take a pregnancy test, yes.
Okay, and you weren't pregnant, right?
No.
When you left San Antonio yourself, you went by way of the Greyhound bus, right?
Correct.
And your father took you?
Correct.
And you didn't tell your father that you didn't want to go to Dallas, right?
No.
And when you went up to Dallas, you stayed with Kayla and Desiree, right?
Correct.
And you called Kayla and Desiree and asked if you could stay there, correct?
I only stayed at Desiree's one night.
Okay, you stayed at Desiree's parents' house, right?
Correct.
They had a barbecue, right?
No, they didn't.
They didn't offer you barbecue from a previous occasion?
No, I didn't eat.
Okay. While you were in Dallas, you were working as a stripper there too, right?
They made me, yes.
Okay. And in order to dance in the Dallas strip club scene, you have to register your fingerprints and show your driver's license to an authority figure, to the county, right?
No, sir.
Okay. You never went to the county to get your fingerprints taken?
Yes, but I didn't have to do that at the strip club.
Right, but you did it for your work at the strip club, right?
No, sir.
Okay. Why did you go get your fingerprints taken in Dallas County?
Because they didn't ask for that.
I thought you just said that you did get your fingerprints taken.
For my ID.
Okay, well, you gave them your ID, right?
Correct.
And they photocopied it?
Correct.
Okay. And that was in order to get an ID for the strip club, right?
Correct.
To verify that you were old enough. That would have been, obviously, before you say that your bag and all of your identifiers were stolen, correct?
Correct.
When you were interviewed by the detective, you indicated to the detective that there might have been some problem in your family with you dating an African-American man. Do you remember that?
Objection relevant, Your Honor.
Sustain.
It goes to bias.
Sustain.
Please note my exception.
Motion to disregard, Your Honor, or instruct the jury to disregard. the
Right, you
motion.
didn't disregard the last words from counsel. Does everyone understand? Thank you.
You asked the detective if he could put money on your books so you could call your mother. Do you remember that?
He asked me if there was anything he wanted me to tell my mother, or he wanted him to tell my mother. And he asked me, should she put money on your books? I said, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so he was gonna facilitate her putting money. That's what that was about?
He said it.
Okay. Do you remember the day that you pled guilty to tampering with evidence in front of Judge Contreras?
Correct.
And you were asked questions by the prosecution related to this offense because they knew that it would probably be some time before you would have to testify in the case, right?
Correct.
And they wanted to, I believe, get a baseline of what your testimony would be at trial. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
And you were asked about the intent to rob and whether or not there was an intent to rob associated with this case. Do you remember that?
Correct.
And you told the judge and the prosecutor, I guess so?
After seeing it, yes.
Okay, but did in your response to the question about whether there was an intent to rob, you said, I guess so, right?
Because it happened. I said, I guess so.
I'm just asking you, is that what you said in response to the question about whether there was an
Yes, sir.
And you don't remember how many gunshots were fired, right?
No.
So at that hearing where you were testifying in front of Judge Contreras, you indicated that you barely knew Jeremiah, right? In school, you've known him for a long.
I knew of him.
Okay. Okay. You say not like that. What you're saying is you haven't previously been driving around town with guns and drugs in a car, right?
No.
But you've seen him in school. You've talked to him on multiple occasions. He's been to parties that you've attended as well.
I only saw him and hung out with him the time that we were at the gathering and after that.
You knew that Jeremiah sold marijuana, right?
Yes.
You knew that Jeremiah carried a weapon for himself and had his own camera, right?
Yes.
You stated,
Like a couple of weeks.
well, how long was it in actual fact?
I couldn't know the time frame because we were always moving places.
Okay, so you just can't commit to how long you were there.
No, but it felt like a long time.
But then it was more than one night for sure.
Yes.
Okay, when you say a couple of weeks, is that an estimate?
Yes.
Pass the witness.
Say,
Yeah, if I could have a moment to get this screen. Ms. Reyes, I want to show you what has been entered into evidence as State's Exhibit number 126. This item that I'm pointing at, do you recognize what it is and who it belonged to?
The slides,
And who did those slides belong to?
TAYMOR.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about your interview with Detective Juarez back on September 5th of 2017. During that interview, did you inform Detective Juarez that you had told Mark Saldivar that you would be with at least 2 friends?
Yes,
Okay, and just going back to when you told Mark Saldivar that you would be with 2 friends, why did you say that?
because I wanted to make him aware of who I was going to be with.
Okay, and when you showed up, you were with 3 friends. How did that third person get into the picture?
Jeremiah decided he wanted to go.
Okay. Can you please describe to the jury the relationship between the defendant and Jalen Bell?
Weird,
Were they friends with each other?
best friends.
Okay. Did you observe them staying together?
Yes,
And would you observe them together frequently?
all the time.
And, okay. Now, during your interview with Detective Juarez, did you inform Detective Juarez that the defendant was specifically looking for a photographer for a photo shoot?
Correct.
And during your interview with Detective Juarez, did you inform Detective Juarez that prior to what happened at the stoplight on McCullough, you had no knowledge of the defendant's intentions to rob Mark Saldivar?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In your statement to Detective Juarez, did you tell Detective Juarez that the defendant only told you that it was going to be a photo shoot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In your statement to Detective Juarez, did you tell Detective Juarez that the defendant told Mark, give me all your shit?
Yes, ma'am.
In that interview, did you tell Detective Juarez that Mark didn't want to give up his belongings?
Yes,
In that interview, did you tell Detective Juarez that they took Mark's backpack away from him?
yes.
And when you say they, who do you mean?
More.
Does that include anybody else?
Jalen.
In your interview with Detective Juarez, you stated that they opened Mark Saldivar's backpack. Is that correct?
Correct.
When you say they, who are you referring to?
TAYMOR.
Does that include anyone else?
Jalen.
And in your interview with Detective Juarez, did you tell Detective Juarez that they beat Mark Saldivar?
Yes.
And when you say they, who do you mean?
Jalen, Jeremiah, TAYMOR.
In your interview with Detective Juarez, did you tell Detective Juarez that they threw Mark Saldivar out of the motor vehicle?
Yes.
And when you say they, who are you referring to there?
Jalen.
Now, in your interview with Detective Juarez asked you if Mark Saldivar was in possession of any weapons. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you tell him when you had the interview with him?
No, that he didn't look like a boy that would have weapons.
And in your interview with Detective Juarez, you further stated that you didn't believe that the defendant was acting in self-defense. Isn't that
Objection,
correct?
Your Honor, calls for ultimate opinion on legal.
He's opened the door, Your Honor.
All right, that will be sustained as to, entering the province of the jury.
And I asked the jury to disregard the question and the answer.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you do disregard that last question and answer.
Motion for mistrial.
Denied.
Now, regarding, I want to go back to the album cover, okay? When we're talking about you being in lingerie, whose idea was that?
TAYMOR's.
And in your interview with Detective Juarez, isn't it true you told Detective Juarez that the defendant, TAYMOR McIntyre, is the one that made you agree to wear lingerie?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you spoke to Detective Juarez, isn't it true that you told him that the defendant was the only person that you saw with a gun on that day?
Yes.
And isn't it true that in that interview with Detective Juarez, you also informed him that the defendant was wearing a white shirt during the offense?
Yes.
And during that interview, you further stated to Detective Juarez that you observed the defendant shoot the guy on the hood of your motor
Objection
vehicle.
to leading, Your Honor.
Sustained.
In your interview with Detective Juarez, what did you tell him about who shot the person that was on the hood of your motor vehicle?
I said TAYMOR did it.
During your interview with Detective Juarez, what did you tell him about Jeremiah Rodriguez and what he would sell? And you further informed Detective Juarez that you knew that Jeremiah usually carried firearms, correct?
Yes.
Okay. During your interview with Detective Juarez, you also informed him that you, the defendant, and Jalen Bell were staying at Jeremiah Rodriguez's home for at least 1 week prior to the offense,
Objection
correct?
leading, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Move to instruct the jury to disregard the question.
Ladies and gentlemen, disregard the question.
Motion from Mr. Hunt.
Denied.
When you spoke with Detective Juarez during your interview, who did you tell him, what did you tell Detective Juarez about where you were staying with the defendant, TAYMOR MCINTYRE, and Jalen Bell?
Jeremiah's.
Okay. And when you were answering Mr. Hunter's questions, you kind of further expounded that you couldn't pinpoint an exact time frame, is that correct?
No.
But you're sure that you were there for some time, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, who had the backpack when you were at the Mexican restaurant? Do you recall who you told him had the backpack?
Yes.
Who is that?
Jalen.
And when Detective Juarez, do you recall telling Detective Juarez what color that camera was?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
What color was the camera?
It was a white Canon.
And is that what you told Detective Juarez in your interview?
Yes.
All right. Now, Mr. Hunter asked you a question about whether you saw the camera when Mark got into the vehicle. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall the exact moment that you saw the camera?
No.
Okay. After the offense, when you all were at the Mexican restaurant, how did you see the
Objection asked
camera?
and answered and leading, Your Honor.
Overruled.
You can answer the question.
Yes.
So you saw the camera at the Mexican restaurant?
No.
Okay. Did you see the camera when y'all were at Jeremiah's house?
Objection asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled.
You can answer.
Yes.
Okay. And when you were at Jeremiah's house, who had the camera at Jeremiah's house?
All the boys.
When you say all the boys, who is that?
Jalen, Jeremiah, and TAYMOR.
Now, back to the Mexican restaurant, what did you observe Jalen Bell doing with Mark's wallet at the Mexican restaurant?
He was tossing all his stuff out.
And isn't that what you told Detective Juarez when you had your interview with him?
Yes, ma'am.
In your interview with Detective Juarez, you informed Detective Juarez that you, the defendant, and Jalen Bell got a ride from Starbucks to go meet back at Jeremiah Rodriguez's home.
Objection
Yes.
leading, asked and answered.
The objection to leading will be sustained.
Okay. What did you tell Detective Juarez about where you went with the defendant and Jalen Bell after leaving the Mexican restaurant?
I told them that
Objection hearsay.
Overruled.
I told them that we went to the Starbucks next door, and TAYMOR was on my phone, and then a woman came and picked us up.
Now, I want to turn to you about, or talk to you about the defense counsel's line of questioning regarding whether you thought the victim, Mark Anthony Saldivar, had intentions of having sex with you. We saw the video published to the jury, but is this something that was suggested to you by the defendant?
No.
Okay. After the defendant and Jalen Bell went through the bag, what did they say to Mark regarding the items that they saw in the bag?
TAYMOR said, "What do you think that you were going to do? Did you think you were gonna fuck?"
And on the statement that was played for the jury, you said once you were told the contents of the bag, you were shocked and didn't know what to think. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
All right. But in talking to Detective Juarez, you were kind of guessing as to what Mark's intentions were. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay. And you were kind of just stereotyping him in a stereotypical male way. Is that correct?
As
Correct.
Your Honor, this is leading as to the answer, it's functionally testifying from the prosecution.
With regards to reading, the objection will be sustained.
Motion to instruct the jury disregard the statement of the prosecutor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here to disregard the last question from the state.
Motion for mistrial.
Denied.
When you met with Detective Juarez and gave your interview, isn't it true that back on that day in September of 2017, you told him back then that the defendant was threatening to kill you?
Yes.
Okay. And the detective in your interview told you that he was listing you as a suspect in the capital murder, correct?
Objection hearsay.
That will be sustained.
Did the detective tell you anything about what could possibly happen to you if you spoke with him?
Yes.
Okay, and did that include being charged in the offense?
Yes.
And you still decided to talk with him, correct?
Yes.
And when you spoke with Detective Juarez, did you have any plea agreement in place?
No.
Did Detective Juarez promise you anything in exchange for your interview?
No.
At any point, well, you know what? Now I want to turn to the day that you entered your plea agreement. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And you gave testimony on that day, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And so on the day that you gave testimony, isn't it true that you testified that you had met TAYMOR MCINTYRE at the gathering at Isaac Ibarra's house?
Correct.
Okay. And in that testimony, didn't you further state that you had been with TAYMOR MCINTYRE from the beginning of April?
Yes.
Okay. In the testimony that you provided on that, you stated you and Mark followed each other on Instagram and TAYMOR wanted a photographer for his album cover.
Yes, ma'am.
In the testimony that you provided, isn't it true that you stated that TAYMOR told you what kind of plans he had for the album cover, and that included TAYMOR MCINTYRE wanting you in lingerie and wearing a mask with weed and guns?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. In the testimony that you provided, isn't it true that you stated that you, the defendant, and Jalen Bell were staying at Jeremiah's house?
Yes, ma'am.
And you stated the people that were staying at Jeremiah's house was TAYMOR, Jalen, Desiree, Jeremiah, and Jeremiah's family.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Okay, and the testimony that you provided, you stated that you were the driver of that black Kia Forte, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the testimony that you provided on that day, you further state that Mark Saldivar, he had a camera and a backpack, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I'm going to object to that's an answer to cumulative. I also don't think it's a proper impeachment. They can't offer a prior consistent statement if we didn't attack that statement for fabrication.
All right, objection is overruled.
Thank you. Now, in the testimony that you provided on the day that you entered your plea agreement, isn't it true that you testified that TAYMOR MCINTYRE was sitting in the front passenger seat of your motor vehicle?
Yes.
And on that day, you further stated Jeremiah was sitting behind you, correct?
Correct.
And you also stated on that day that Jalen Bell was in the middle seat, correct?
Yes.
And that the victim, Mark Saldivar, was sitting directly behind TAYMOR MCINTYRE, correct?
Yes.
All right. On the day that you entered your plea agreement, you further testified that when you all were at the stoplight, TAYMOR brought out the gun and pointed it at Mark, correct?
Correct.
You further stated Mark didn't want to give up his bag. Immediately, TAYMOR started hitting him with the gun.
Correct.
On the day that you entered your plea agreement and provided testimony, isn't it true that you testified that TAYMOR used and pulled out the gun and stated to Mark, "Give me your backpack"?
Correct.
In the testimony that you provided on the day that you entered your plea agreement, isn't it true that you stated that you were telling Jalen, Taymor, and Jeremiah to just let Mark go?
Yes,
In your previous testimony, you testified that Jalen pushed Mark out of the car, correct?
correct.
All right. In your previous testimony, you testified that once Mark was pushed out of the car, he jumped on the hood of your car, is that correct?
Correct.
And in your previous testimony, you testified that you pulled over into the Chick-fil-A.
Yes, ma'am.
In your previous testimony on the date that you entered your plea, you testified that Mark was on the hood of the car because his stuff was still inside the vehicle, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in your previous testimony, you did testify that Mark Saldivar kicked in the windshield, and that's when Taymor got out of the car and shot him, correct?
Correct.
When asked on that day how Taymor shot Mark Saldivar, you testified that the defendant, Taymor McIntyre, opened the door and leaned halfway out and halfway in and shot Mark Saldivar, correct?
I'm gonna object to ask and answer. If we're gonna go through everything in the transcript, we could just offer.
You can, make your legal objection. The court will hear the legal objections and make a ruling. So what is your objection?
If I could have a running objection, since we're going through.
What is your objection?
That all of this is cumulative and much of it is not proper rehabilitation on impeachment by prior consistent statement.
All right,
Yes,
your objection.
if I may respond briefly, Your Honor.
Yes.
They have attacked this witness's credibility. They have alleged that she is testifying under an improper influence or motive. And so under Rule 801E1B, I am allowed to explore this line of questioning with her.
Objection is overruled.
And since they further stated that they have no objection to the transcript coming in at this time, the state would offer State's Exhibits 132, which is the transcript, and 133, which is her recorded video statement.
Any objection?
132, no objections, prior sworn testimony. Objections to 133 because the proper method of doing that is to.
Well, now, my question is, do you have any objection? If you do, what's the legal objection?
That the entirety of the statement is not admissible. It contains a great deal of hearsay from another declarant not present to testify.
All right, and which is it?
That would be 133, Your Honor.
All right. Defense states that there's hearsay in 133. Any response?
If he'd like the detective's questions for DACT, I can do that over a break and offer.
All right. With regards to State's Exhibit number 133, defendant's objection will be sustained. And what is the other exhibit number, please?
132, 132.
And defense, you have no objection to 132?
No objections.
All right, State's Exhibit number 132 is admitted without objection.
Ms. Reyes, at any point between the offense date, have you ever named anyone other than Taymor McIntyre as the shooter and murderer of Mark Saldivar?
No, ma'am.
Ask the witness.
Defense?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Yes.
Did you ever tell anybody that he has a gun right before Taymor shot him?
Objection, that's been asked and answered.
Overruled.
But she was overruled, sorry. Have you ever told anybody yelling he has a gun right
No.
before Taymor shot him?
No.
You said that Taymor wanted this photo shoot for his album cover, right?
Correct.
But you told Desiree in Dallas that it was for the promotion of your career as a stripper, right?
No.
And just to be clear, you've testified throughout this process that Jalen had the backpack and was going through it, and Jalen had the wallet, right?
Correct. Taymor had the backpack as well.
And you told the detective that Jalen threw the phone at him.
That's what he said.
Okay, but that's not how you told the detective, right?
I said, that's what Jalen said.
Okay, that's cool. call your attention to minute 3619. 3619.
3619.
Oh, sorry, Thomas. I'm sorry. Did you say that that's what Jalen told you is that it was thrown out of the car?
Yes.
Okay. You told the detective that you had no plan to rob Mr. Saldivar that day when you got in the car to go pick him up, right?
Correct.
And your judgment of what TAYMOR and the other men in the car did is then based on their actions, not their words, right? To you.
Correct.
Nobody ever said, hey, Joanna, we're going to go rob this guy today, right?
No.
Okay. That wasn't something that you expected to happen when you got there, right?
No.
These men reacted to Mark when he got in the car and this thing escalated and then it happened, right?
It happened at the stoplight.
At the stoplight.
Yes.
Okay. So when you told the detective you believed that this was a robbery, you're basing it off what you saw these men do at that stoplight.
Correct.
And so the beginning of the question talking about the fact that Mark contacted you previously on Instagram, you blocked him, and then you made contact with him again, right? And that you were discussing this photo shoot with Mark, right?
Correct.
And in that conversation, you weren't telling Mark that it was about the album cover, was it?
I don't remember texting him much. TAYMOR would text him as well.
Okay, but you definitely had conversations with him, right?
Yes.
And all of the conversations were on your phone, right?
Yes.
So let me ask you this. Did you give the police your phone?
No, because Caleb broke it.
Okay. So you didn't have a phone to provide the police?
No.
Okay. Did you have the broken phone to provide the police?
No.
Okay. Did you give the police your account information to log into Instagram?
Yes.
Okay. Did you give the police account information to log into Snapchat?
Yes.
Okay. So you don't know what happened to those things?
No.
Okay. Were you given any Instagram messages or Snapchat messages to review in preparation of your testimony?
No.
Ask the witness.
No further questions.
Is this witness excused or subject to recall?
He's done his statement.
Subject to recall.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with the pendency of this trial. Make sure that you're available in case someone, either the state or the defense wishes to recall it.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you may start down.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess for you all. And I'm going to have you all to come back at 3:25. Remember my previous instructions, you're not allowed to investigate anything about this case. You're not allowed to start deliberating amongst yourself. Everything that you need to know about this case is to come from the courtroom. Does everyone understand? All right, everyone, please rise for the jury. All right, everyone, please be seated. State, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the state calls Officer Jose Bernal.
All right, could you raise your right hand? You solemnly, I'm sorry, just 1 second. Could I have parties approach just briefly? You do solemnly swear and affirm that your testimony will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, you can lower your hand, take a seat. Please keep your voice up so that members of the jury can hear.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
if you'll state your name for the record and spell your last name.
Sure. Name is Jose Bernal. Last name is Bernal.
All right, state, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Officer Bernal, can you tell us where you're currently employed?
Yes, sir. I'm currently employed for the city of Dallas as a police officer.
And how long have you held that position?
Approximately 18 and a half years.
And do you have to go through certain training to become an officer for the Dallas Police Department?
Yes, sir. I had to go through a 8-month police academy. After that, I had to do a 6-month field training officer type of training. And then I subsequently made it out to the patrol segment.
And so are you a certified police officer in the state of Texas?
Yes, sir, I am.
I'm going to go ahead and ask you, were you a police officer in the Dallas PD on May 7, 2017?
Yes, sir.
And were you dispatched to a scene at approximately 4:55 a.m. in the morning?
Yes, sir, I was.
Where were you dispatched to?
I was dispatched to an apartment complex in the on West Davis Street in the city of Dallas.
And do you know, or can you tell the jury why you were dispatched there?
So we were dispatched regarding what I interpreted as a welfare check. The taxi cab company called and said that they've been trying to reach their cab driver after he had been pressing the panic button several times, and they cannot reach him over the radio.
And did you have anybody with you on this night?
I did, sir. I had a fellow officer with me.
And what officer was that?
Officer McComas.
And were y'all, I guess, riding together, or were y'all riding separately?
We were riding together. Yes, sir.
And did y'all make the scene?
We made it out to the scene, yes.
And when you made it to the scene, what did you do?
So we did observe a white van, taxi type of style van parked within an apartment complex. And so we made contact with the driver to check on his status.
And we made contact with the driver. What did you do after that?
So he's like, hey, buddy, are you okay? And basically the driver responded saying, yeah, this guy owes me $55 and his buddy hasn't came back to pay me.
And you sort of motioned with your hand, like a thumb motion.
Yes, sir, indeed. We didn't even know that the taxi cab had an occupant, a rear occupant, until he kind of hinted.
And did you ever make contact with this occupant?
We did.
And how did you make contact with this occupant?
So I opened up. I believe the taxi cab driver pressed the button, but it automatically opened.
The second row seat. And what did you notice about this occupant of this van?
So this occupant appeared to be impaired. I'm not sure if he was half asleep or impaired. He was clearly impaired because you could tell he was completely insensitive.
And did you make actual contact with this individual?
Yes, sir, we did.
And did you speak with this individual?
We did.
And did you ask him about if he had the money to pay the taxi cab?
We did, yes, sir.
And did he notify you of whether he had the money or not?
He had no form of payment.
And At that point, did you try to identify the individual?
I did, just to ensure we knew who we were speaking with.
And did he give you a name?
He did.
And subsequently, did you ever find out if that was his true and correct name?
So I ran back to the car computer and I ran that information and didn't check out.
And please explain to the jury what do you mean by not check out?
So the name he provided, we run into the system and I received a no records found, which is usually reserved for someone with no ID or someone providing fictitious information.
And then did you make contact with the individual again?
So at that point, yes.
And what did you do at that point?
So at that point, I was looking at depth of service as a possible arrestable. So I wanted to make sure the scene was safe. So I told him to step out of the taxi cab to ensure that he was patted down for officer safety.
And will you explain to the jury how you pat somebody down for officer safety?
Do you need me to stand, sir, or just talk?
You can just explain it if you can.
Yes. So we have to make sure we know where the hands are, just so, because the hands will kill you. So when I told him to step out, I told him to face the van, and I grabbed both of his hands behind him. And so I grabbed on his thumbs, because that way you can control him, the subject better that way. And as I did that, I went to perform my pat down, which is of the outer clothing. And when I went across his waistband, that's when I felt the bulge and a metal object.
And through your training experience, did you believe that what that object was?
Yes, sir.
What did you believe it was?
A handgun.
And at that point, what did you do?
So at that point, I quickly pushed him on his back and pressed him against the van. I said, "You better not move." And I looked at my cover officer and I said, "Cuff him."
And were y'all able to handcuff this individual?
Yes, sir.
And did you retrieve what you believed to be a handgun in his waistband?
Yes, sir. It was a handgun.
And at that point, was he detained at that point?
Yes, sir. He was black 9mm Smith & Wesson.
And do you know the serial number of that particular weapon?
I don't recall. It's been 8 years, sir.
Okay. And that's what I was about to ask you.
Yes.
You have a pretty good memory if you memorize it. But let me mark. I'm going to show you what's marked state exhibit number 34. Can you just flip through that and tell me if you can identify it?
Yes. Okay, yes, sir. I found the serial number.
Okay. And so the state exhibit number 134, it's not entered into evidence, but the fact is that a police report that you and Officer McComas made?
Yes, sir. This is my
The previous question was, do you have the serial number of that particular handgun?
I do.
And what would that serial number be?
So it's going to be L like Lincoln, E like Edward, J like John, and then it's 9244.
9244?
Yes, sir.
And at that time, was that weapon seized and then placed in property?
It was, yes, sir.
I'll show you that's the mark state exhibit number 135. I'm going to ask.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And if you can open it up and can you please retrieve what's inside of it?
Yes.
Can you please open that? And can you please view what the contents of that bag was and tell me if that is the handgun that you seized that night, and if you have And Judge, at this time, the state would be offering state exhibit number 135 into evidence for tender to the defense.
Our state exhibit 135 is in it's not. I don't know if I said it.
No,
State's body contents are admitted.
And now, at any time, were you able to truly identify the individual that you had detained?
Yes,
And
Jalen Bell.
Jalen Bell. Now, that individual, can you tell the jury, well, what was this individual's height?
He was a pretty tall guy. I'm only 5'6", so I remember he stood over me pretty good. 40 pounds.
And I see you looking down. Are you referencing your police report to decipher that?
Yes, sir.
And again, I understand it's 7.5 years later, so I understand.
Correct. Yes.
Subsequently, did you arrest this individual named Jalen Bell?
Yes, sir, I did.
And this was on May 17th.
Yes, sir.
And what did you arrest him for?
So we arrested him for the gun. He had a little bit of marijuana on his person. We arrested him as a fugitive from justice.
This encounter occurred on May 7th, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you said at 4 o'clock in the morning or so?
It was just before 5, sir.
Okay, gotcha. And you said that you placed the gun in evidence?
Sir?
Okay. Are you familiar with the place where guns are stored in Dallas County for cases like this?
Yes, I am.
Okay, evidence, or is like sort of all the evidence all together?
No, they have a separate place for it, sir.
Okay, can you describe that place?
Well, they do kind of refer to it as an armory, and they do have it more on the back side of the
Y'all don't do maintenance on guns that are kept there, do you?
That's I would not know how to answer that, sir. I don't know that part.
Okay. You do know generally that it's important to keep evidence in the state that it's found in, right?
I would think so, yes, sir.
I'll pass it
I know
over. Yes.
I have a rules committee vote, you're not allowed to discuss your testimony.
Yes, ma'am.
During the pendency of this trial.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'll make sure you leave. And if you all want to make sure
Thank you.
the evidence is packaged back up.
All right, state calls the next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the state calls David Pendleton.
All right, if you raise your right hand, you solemnly swear to affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
All right, just put the microphone,
Just like
on
this
your
one
belt.
here. Like I have it. Just on your belt. Is that fine?
Yes, and make sure that you keep your voice up so members of the jury can hear. If you'll state your name for the record and spell your last.
Pendleton. That's Pendleton.
All right, state, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Pendleton, can you please just tell the jury what your occupation is?
I'm a firearms examiner at the Bexar County Criminal Investigation Laboratory. Most people just call it the crime lab.
And can you just explain to them what that entails?
On a daily basis, I'm going to examine evidence submitted to the laboratory, usually from criminal cases. That would include things such as firearms, ammunition, and ammunition components, such as fired cartridge cases or fired bullets. And I would try and make a determination if those items were fired in certain firearms.
And how long have you been working at the Bexar County Lab?
A little over 19 years.
And is this the Bexar County Lab, is it an accredited laboratory?
Yes, sir.
And can you explain to the jury just what that means, what that means to be an accredited laboratory?
Yes, sir. We're accredited by the by ANAB. That stands for ANSI National Accreditation.
Can you explain to the jury and tell them some of the training and education, if you can?
Yes. As far as master's degree in justice policy, both from the University of Texas at San Antonio. I'm also a member of the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners, and I'm certified in the area of firearms identification by that organization. Majority of our training is actually within the laboratory. It takes several years, actually. We also conduct outside annual training when we can attend. And I'm also yearly proficiency tested by an outside agency, as well as I'm required to maintain a license by the state of Texas.
Thank you. And have you testified as an expert before?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury how many times?
Somewhere around 100.
And I guess you do continuing education as in conferences or
No objection if the court would just give an instruction about what a demonstrative is.
I'm going to show you first what's marked State Exhibit number 136. And
Yes, that is a revolver.
and this type of handgun, would it be able to, or one, does, when you fire, is the shell casing ejected?
He's in the handgun. I don't have a pointer, so the
You would like to step down to the elbow, and you can point from there.
thank you, Your Honor.
Just make sure you keep your voice up so the jurors can hear.
Yes, Your Honor. So obviously, you're looking at a picture photo of a revolver. If you were to describe the components, this area here would be called the frame. This is the barrel, trigger guard, trigger, the grip, sometimes referred to as the butt, hammer. There's a firing pin associated with the hammer, and this is the cylinder. Now, inside the cylinder, there's a series of chambers. And the way a revolver works, some are loaded differently, but just for the purpose of this, if you were to press a button, you would load cartridges into it, and then you would close it. One of these cartridges will be in line with the barrel. When the hammer is cocked, either by single action or double action, when the hammer is cocked, the cylinder will rotate, rotating the next cartridge that's unfired at this point, and it's in line. When the trigger is pulled, the hammer will fall. It'll strike the primer of the cartridge, ignite its gunpowder. The combustion of gases will cause the bullet to enter and exit the barrel, but the cartridge case itself that has been fired will stay in this cylinder. For the next firing or shot or discharge, you would pull the trigger pull the trigger or cock the hammer. This will rotate that fired cartridge case out of the way, and now a new unfired cartridge is ready to be fired. And you will just continue that process until you run out of ammunition, or as you desire, I would assume.
Since you're in particular on the revolvers on State Exhibit number 136, how do the spent shell casings, how do they exit, or how are they taken out of the revolver?
Depending on the type of revolver, in this case, if you were to open the cylinder, this portion right here, which is called a cylinder, excuse me, the name, the nomenclature is escaping me. I want to say cylinder pin, but it's a rod. It would open up, and you would actually punch that, and it would ejector rod, and it would cause all of the fired cartridge cases to push out a little bit. Another way to do it is just to turn it over, dump it, they'll fall.
And so this particular type of handgun, you would have to actually manually extract the spent shell casings or the live rounds for that matter.
Yes, sir.
Let's since you're here, State Exhibit number 137. Can you describe to the jury what we're looking at here?
This is a semi of the same, the frame overall, trigger guard, trigger. This area is called the slide. Inside, there is a firing pin. Sometimes they'll give maybe a hammer or a striker. It's a little bit irrelevant, but there's also the chamber and the barrel located in here.
And in particular, this when this gun is fired, does it retain, like the revolver, the shell casing, or does it expel it?
No, sir.
So it expels the shell casing?
Yes, sir.
And where would that shell casing be expelled from?
Generally, depending on most firearms will expel to the right of the, if held properly, of the shooter. The way you would load, there's a magazine that would, we don't have one, but basically you would load the magazine, you would insert the magazine into the grip, and it's under spring pressure under the slide. So you would pull the slide back, and when you do, a cartridge will pop up slightly. So when the slide moves forward, it will strip it from the magazine, load it into the chamber, and put the weapon into battery where it's ready to fire. Once you pull the trigger and the firing pin is released, doing that same action of causing the bullet to exit the barrel, these are gas operated, and some of the gases will cause the slide to return to the rear, and in so doing, it will pull that fired cartridge case out of the chamber by the use of what's called an extractor. Just think of it as like a little hand or a claw. It will pull it out till it reaches a point and it hits an ejector, which is a post sticking out of the back, and it'll literally hit it and kick it out of the weapon. When the slide comes forward, another cartridge would have popped up, and it loads it for the next shot.
Okay, thank you. You can take a seat back up there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Now, I believe you just mentioned all this, the state exhibit number 137, you mentioned magazine. Can you describe to the jury what that means by magazine?
Most semi-automatic or automatic weapons will have a place to feed the ammunition from, to contain it and also to feed it. So they're generally a box type magazine. There are other types, but generally in semi-automatic pistol, it would be a box magazine. You would load it, and then you would insert it into the weapon to basically load the weapon.
Now, in particular, these weapons, the firearm that we see here in 137 and 136, they're considered, I guess, the handgun area.
They're handguns, yes, sir.
And are deadly weapons.
Yes, sir.
And any firearm that is able to expel bullets from it by use of, I guess, the energy that from the cartridge, is that considered a deadly weapon?
And or death, it would be considered a deadly weapon, yes.
Now, can you explain to the jury, I believe you brought a demonstrative aid up there, and I would ask, Your Honor, if Mr. Penalty can use this demonstrative aid, which is brought within from the lab, but he would like not to enter the evidence, but I'll.
The jury's being entered into evidence.
All right, yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Penalty, can you explain one about different calibers?
Yes, sir.
Can you, I know probably there's probably, I don't know how many, I don't know, so probably many, but I mean, in particular with handguns, I think there's also still so many to count, but can you name some of the, I guess, the more common ones?
Some of the common calibers that you would experience would be 380 auto. You might hear 9mm Luger, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 auto. These are just a few. There's others, but these are probably the most common.
Okay, and then hierarchy. Let me ask: is a 380? Which one's bigger? Say a 380 or a 40 caliber?
The 40 caliber is bigger.
And what about a 380 compared to a 357?
The 357 is larger. You know, I think the demonstrative might actually assist in this.
And if you can, just describe to the jury what we're discussing right now about the calibers and the shell casings and the ammunition.
Okay. So if you were to look at this and think of it as, well, it's a markup of an unfired cartridge. It's okay, some people call it ammo, some people call it brass, some people call it a bullet. For our purposes, this is a cartridge, an unfired cartridge to be exact. And it has 4 components to it. One is the primer. This is where you would strike to cause a small explosion. The second is the case, cartridge case or case body itself. Inside would be gunpowder. And the fourth is the bullet or projectile that we would refer to. When it comes to caliber, caliber is referring to the nominal diameter of the bore of a firearm. The ammunition that is fired in it will be designated by measuring the diameter of the bullet. So, for example, a 45 caliber bullet will be 45 hundredths of an inch wide, almost a half inch. A 25 auto, which is a caliber, would be almost a quarter of an inch wide. 9mm, although it's in the metric system, it measures in standards around 0.355 hundredths of an inch. So it's in the 30 caliber range. So the larger the denomination in the standard numbers, the larger the caliber. It also refers to, when you're talking about caliber, is the length of a cartridge case. For example, was just mentioned 357. Okay, 357 Magnum is a cartridge, and so is 38 Special. Well, they're exactly the same. However, the cartridge case length is slightly different. Okay, so that kind of roundabout tells you what a caliber is, and each caliber is designed to be fired in a firearm that's made for that, or to be chambered for that caliber.
Okay, thank you. Now, let me ask you this. For instance, a 380 can be 5mm handgun.
In some instances, it can, but there would be telltale signs of that happening.
And can you tell the jury what do you mean by telltale signs?
Well, because if you have a 9mm firearm, it's chambered to fit exactly the cartridge shorter. So if you were to load one in there and that expansion of gases, well, that expansion of gases would cause that cartridge case to expand to try to meet that diameter of the bore. So your cartridge cases would display some type of deformation, usually a bulge, or in some cases a split. So it can be done. And I've had cases where it has been done. It's just not designed to do it.
And I guess just a curiosity here, could a 45 caliber be fired in a 9mm handgun?
No, sir. It's too large.
Because the 45 caliber cartridge is the 9mm handgun.
Yes, sir.
Let me show you. What's been marked State Exhibit number 9. Can you just please take that out of there and view it and tell me what that is?
Appears to be an unfired cartridge.
And this unfired cartridge, I know that you never reviewed it, did you?
No, sir.
But what size is that?
Appears to be a 380.
380.
Although my lighting in here is a little hard. I used to usually look at this under a microscope, so it does appear to be 380.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to show you what's been marked State Exhibit number 35. Can you please tell me if you recognize that packaging?
I do.
And how do you recognize that packaging?
Evidence that's submitted to the laboratory by the agency goes through our evidence receiving section, and it's issued what's called a CIL, or Criminal Investigation Laboratory Number. And that number is unique to any evidence that's submitted that corresponds with the agency case number. So I recognize that I wrote that number that was assigned to this evidence on the packaging, a date that I opened it, my initials, and item number that I signed this envelope.
So indicating that and what you just testified to, does that mean that you had contact with this object and that you analyzed it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you please take that object out of the packaging of State Exhibit number 35? And then also take it out of that package. Correct? Now, what is State Exhibit number 35? And you say 9mm.
Yes, sir.
Opposed to State Exhibit number 109, which is a live cartridge of a 380.
Yes.
Auto.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Live cartridge. Is that correct?
Yes, there's other differences as well.
Okay. And well, will you explain to the jury what the other differences are?
The main difference being that they are different calibers. As I mentioned, the cartridge case length, the length of the cartridge case is much longer. As well.
And so you can visibly see that the cell cartridge or casing of exhibit number 35, the 380. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to put back in 109, and let's go ahead and put back in 135. And if you don't mind, put that back in there. Now, this exhibit number 35. Will you like us to review it?
Sure.
You all who that was. What's that?
Jose Salcedo.
And at this current time, is Stephen Salcedo still with the office or the lab?
No, sir.
And do you recall how long ago he left?
I want to say end of 2007, probably 2008.
Can you tell the jury when he made a final report or a released report?
He actually issued two reports, but the first one was September 8th of 2000.
You state two reports.
Yeah.
What is the second report?
Later, September 22nd, 2007.
Okay. How do you release it? I guess that was, you spoke to me about this, but describe to the jury what you mean by release the report.
Can I hold up a report? They can't see what it says, but I just want to show a watermark.
No objection.
Thank you.
Yes.
So this is where you can see this watermark that says released. Okay. Keep that in mind. Generally, the way a examination and a review works at the laboratory is thus. You'll examine evidence, you'll take notes, and then you will send that and issue a report, and you'll send that to someone else for review. There's two types of reviews. One is a technical review, and one is an administrative review. In either one of those reviews, if you find an error that has been made, you send it back to the person who created it and say, hey, can you fix this? And they'll say yes, they'll fix it, and they'll send it back to you. And in our computer system, it just goes back and forth, back and forth. Now, during that process, and this is what we do in the normal course of business, instead of release, that watermark will say draft because it hasn't been released. It's just still, there could be changes that can be made. Now, once both those technical and administrative reviews are done, the person who wrote the report will release it. Once that report is released and it has this watermark, it's an official copy. So no changes can be made to it. You can't go back and say, oh, I made a mistake or I misspelled something, let's change it. You can't do that any longer because it's an official record. So part of our quality assurance program, that the way to remedy that if you find an error after the fact is to create what's called an amended to fix that error. So that's why there's two reports in this case.
And that's what my next question is that there's two reports in this. They both told the jury what the error was on a 2017 report.
Yes, sir. When we used our system differently back then than we do now, we had to hand type everything. The portion here where it describes the evidence in the Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge case, which obviously is incorrect. His notes and everything bear the fact that it is a 9mm. And his results.
I'm going to object to hearsay and confrontation, Your Honor.
Right, that is the same.
I'd ask the jury to disregard that last portion of his answer. I'm not objecting to his testimony.
Second, 2017.
Yes.
And on that report, what is, I guess, the results, or what was the line that gave what he tested?
Basically, it was changed from description from 40
Comes over from the evidence room. There are certain numbers associated with that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's the checks and balances. The one checking the numbers and making sure they match with the number also.
Yes, sir.
And in this particular case was the SAP number 170-89350.
Yes, sir.
Now, after Mr. Salcedo left, do you even know where he is at currently? If you know.
Honestly, I think he may be working at the NIBIN Correlation Center, which is run by the ATF. I think. I'm not certain. He left the laboratory because he really wanted to pursue a different career in some type of business, and so he went to work for UPS. But I'm not sure if he's there anymore. I like Steve, and I just haven't spoken with him in some time.
All right, but then just trying to get some feedback, because subsequently you were asked to actually review the showcasing in this case. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that state exhibit number 35, the shell casing in this particular case, did you analyze that shell casing?
I did, yes, sir.
And with your findings, what did you find that shell casing to be?
A 9mm Luger cartridge case.
And with that particular shell casing, can I ask you, how do you review it and what do you look for?
Well, there was additional evidence that was submitted with this. I don't know if I can.
Well, I'm going to go into that. But
Oh, okay. Well,
initially, what do you do with the shell casing? If you just receive a shell casing, sort of like Steve Salcedo, what do you do with it?
the first thing I'm going to notate, obviously, is caliber, and then I'm going to document its class characteristics. That'd be the shape of the firing pin, maybe the structure of the breech face. In some cases, those class characteristics can kind of give us an indication of what type of firearm fired it, because class characteristics belong to a group of firearms. For example, a certain make and model of firearm may exhibit the exact same class characteristics. And so if I had a cartridge case and it had certain attributes that were attributable to, say, a Glock pistol, I could say, oh, this is a fired cartridge case, and it was possibly fired in a Glock pistol. In this case, it was kind of generic, so I can basically just say I couldn't tell you what make or model it was fired in.
Thank you. And as you said earlier, that if this shell casing was maybe fired in a caliber up from it, did you notate anything about the any expansion of the shell casing itself or any damage to it?
No, it seemed to be fine.
And then you stated about other evidence, and I'm going to show you what's marked state exhibit number 135. And state exhibit number 135, can you let me know, one, is this a firearm in a magazine that you analyzed?
Yes, sir.
And can you just read off the serial number to that?
Yes, sir. It's LEJ9244.
Thank you. Now, since I have this handgun in front of you and the magazine, can you hold this magazine, hold a firearm?
As I mentioned earlier about this loading into the magazine, it's under spring tension, but it has these lips on the end, so when the cartridge goes into it, underneath those lips, the first one, it'll catch it. And you can continue to load cartridges under this spring until it can reach its capacity, which in this case is a total of 8. You would then insert it into the magazine, excuse me, like this. You would pull the slide back. That cartridge would pop up. When the slide comes forward, it will load. Now, if you can notice, this is sticking out just a little bit. It means that even though this is a Smith & Wesson magazine, either it wasn't made for this particular model, or there's more than likely an additional component that goes around this butt area for gripping this work.
And you stated that it's sticking out just a little bit at the end, but was this a magazine? Did you use this magazine when you test fired the firearm? And so it was able to be used.
Yes, sir.
And tell the jury what you mean by test firing the firearm.
When we do a test, the obvious, the make, the model, the serial numbers it has, and if they are working, I will test fire the weapon twice, either in the range or into a water tank and recover what we would call our tests or our known standards. We know where they came from because we fired them from the weapon.
Thank you. And were you able to obtain the shell casing that was fired from it?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you what's marked State Exhibit number 138. And can you please describe to the jury, one, how you would, or what do you look for on the shell casings to compare shell casings to each other?
The first thing we're going to look for are the class characteristics. These are general. As I said before, class characteristics can belong to a group. So the same 40 Smith & Wesson caliber Glock pistol and the same model number will exhibit, well, obviously, the caliber is a class characteristic. The shape of the firing pin, is it circle, is it rectangular, is it elliptical? That's a class characteristic. Characteristics of the breech face, are there parallel lines from the cutting on the breech face? From a bullet standpoint, you would think class characteristics are things such as the caliber, obviously, but also things such as the landing. How many of them? Are there 6? Are there 5? Are there 7? Do they twist to the left? Do they twist to the right? These are left by the rifling of the barrel. These are class characteristics. If these are different, then from anything we're comparing as questioned, then we can make the determination these aren't the same. If, however, they are the same, and because class characteristics can share the same group, then we would move into what's called individual characteristics. And these are the fine markings that are left from the firing process of the firearm that are left on the softer metals of fired bullets and cartridge cases. We would first test the weapon, take those 2 tests, and we would use what's called a comparison microscope, which is essentially 2 microscopes that I can view items side by side through one set of eyepieces. I will look on those tests to see if I see markings that are individual, that are reproducing from test to test. And if I can find those and say that they are sufficient agreement, then I will see if any questioned evidence have those same individual markings. If there is sufficient agreement, then I can make a determination whether or not that item was fired from this particular firearm.
Thank you. And so I guess at the end, you're saying that if a shell case is fired from any firearm, it would leave some unique characteristics associated with that firearm.
Generally, not always, but generally, yes.
Okay. And in this particular case, reviewing the shell casing that was fired from the test fire that you did with this firearm, were you able to compare that shell casing with the shell casing that was entered into evidence on this case in State Exhibit number 35?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell the jury 2 shell casings, were they fired from the same weapon?
They were not fired from. The question, the evidence cartridge case that was submitted was not fired in the firearm that was submitted.
And is that because of the used earlier?
Actually, not individual characteristics. There was an exclusion based on class characteristics. So we didn't even need to get to the individual portion. This exclusion was based on the class. They didn't share the same class characteristics.
And what do you mean by that, in class?
Although for example, they shared the same caliber, which is a class characteristic, and that's okay. But the shape of their firing pin and the shape of the aperture is the hole which the firing pin sticks out of from the slide. They were markedly different, knowing that they did not exhibit the same class characteristics.
And on State Exhibit number 138, is that a photo that was taken by you when you examined these shell casings from the top?
Yes, sir.
And the one on the left is which one is that?
The one on the left is the cartridge case from the scene.
And then the one to the right,
That is a test.
that you made the test, the one. That's the interstate exhibit number 138, the evidence will typically, that's for any objection.
No objection.
State's exhibit number 138 is submitted.
May I publish on?
Yes.
I'm going to show the jury state exhibit number 138.
And step down if.
Oh, I'm going to point.
Thank you.
I don't know if he wants to get his steps in today.
Okay.
What I'm pointing out right now on this overhead is it's on my right. And which shell casing is this?
That would be one of the tests from the firearm, from the pistol.
That you made the test fire.
Yes, sir.
And this one on the left is the one that was the shell case that was entered into evidence on this case.
Yes, sir.
And you know what? Actually, Judge, I'm going to ask him to step down and come down here if you don't mind.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Milton? On state exhibit number 138, can you point out what we're looking at and describe to the jury what the differences you stated earlier on the stand?
I may.
Oh, sure.
To see it easier. So when we spoke about this demonstrative yesterday, earlier in the primer, the area we're looking right here is the firing pin impression. This is where the firing pin is going to hit it. This back area is where it sits flat in the firearm. It's called the breech face area. So there's going to be a negative impression of the breech face area, a negative impression of the firing pin impression, and some other areas that I'm talking about. But this is the area. It's not clear. Yeah.
And so you just described to the jury, it's that top, that flat portion round. Can you please tell the jury what we're looking at here?
So this is the firing pin impression of the test, and this is the firing pin impression of the questioned. All this area back here is breech face area. Now, if you notice, there's an area, just think of it as puffy scrapes like this, also around this one. What you're looking at is, okay, that firing pin sticks through the hole in the breech face. This primer is much softer metal. So when it strikes it and that little explosion happens, you're going to have back into the crevice around the firing pin. Does that make sense? Okay, so now when it gets extracted and ejected, that metal is still in those crevices around the firing pin, and it's going to go at an angle and get kicked out of the firearm, and it's going to make the scraping motions. So that is all of this scraping motions, or these striations that you're seeing on this breech face. Which is important because this is also a class difference.
Thanks. Thanks, sir. So, in your opinion, these two shell casings, were they fired from the same weapon?
No, sir.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. President. How are you?
Afternoon. I'm fine, sir. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions about sort of the paper chase here, so bear with me because I want you to try to help me understand a couple.
Yes, sir.
Back in 2017, when I believe you said it was Mr. Saucedo was working at the laboratory, is back when this shell casing was first received for your lab, for consideration by your lab, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And approach real quick. Can you show me the cartridge casing that was originally received back in 2017?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so, gosh, you really do need a microscope, don't you?
Yes, sir. And plus the lighting is bad.
But it says at the top, Blazer, and then and 9mm Luger.
Yes, sir.
Blazer's the brand manufactures this round.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this shell casing was recovered at a crime scene and, sent over to the laboratory. Is that fair, accurate?
Yes, sir.
What happened? And time frame, correct?
Yes, sir.
And have you looked at the chain of custody from when it was first collected at the scene until when you finally received it?
No, so the way it works for us, the chain of custody, the submitting agency will submit it to the laboratory to our evidence receiving section. They will submit a request for analysis. In this case, examine this cartridge case. And from there, it follows an internal chain of custody. So I will go check this out from evidence receiving I did.
And let me just stop you right there. When you say internal, do you mean internal to your laboratory?
Yes, sir.
Not so separate and apart from the police department's chain of custody?
Yes, sir.
That's what you mean by internal?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Continue. I didn't mean that.
That's okay. I will take it to my laboratory section, conduct analysis, do a report, package the evidence when I'm done, and return it to the evidence receiving section, at which time the agency will send someone to collect it.
And take it back to their property room?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, that's what you do normally, but you can't obviously speak for what Mr. Saucedo did. You weren't looking at this cartridge back in 2017, right?
I did not look at the cartridge, but it's the same item of evidence.
Okay. Well, I'm just asking, back then in 2017, what Mr. Saucedo did with the evidence, you're generalizing now when you talk about the procedures, right?
Well, that procedure was still the same. It has been for quite some time.
Okay, right. That's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yes, sir. But I
As to
can't
whether
say
it was done, you can't say.
Yes, sir.
If y'all could not talk over each other, because the court reporter has to type down everything that everyone's saying.
Okay, sorry.
As to what was specifically done here with Mr. Saucedo, you were not an eyewitness to what Mr. Saucedo did.
Yes.
Okay. So, in the case in question, from what you can tell looking at Mr. Saucedo's work, it's a generic brand of ammunition, and the markings on it are fairly standard, in part for the course for a 9mm handgun, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
But at the time in 2017, there was nothing telegraphed specifically. This was shot out of a Glock, or this was shot out of a Smith & Wesson, or anything else.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. And so it gets entered into a database, right?
I believe the police department does that. Yes, sir.
Okay. What does the database entail? I mean, in my mind, when you talk about a database, I'm thinking microscope slides that AI can track and pinpoint and all the rest. But is that what you mean by a database?
Yes. What they refer to, and I don't see any markings as to whether or not it was actually entered, but they may not have done that at the time. But basically, it's called the National Integrated Information Network, the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or NIBIN. And think of it like a fingerprint system for fired cartridge cases. So digitally, these markings that we were looking at, potential associations. It can't be used for identification purposes because you need a microscope and a trained person to do that. But it can give you leads to possible associations, and that's what the system is.
Okay. And you can't say specifically whether that was done for the shell casing or not?
No, sir.
Okay. But from your review of this file that there was no gun to compare it to for a long time?
Yes, sir.
7 years, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm going to show you some things I'd like you to help me understand what they are. Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes.
Needs a break. I'm sorry, I didn't see you signal. Remember my previous instructions, and I will have you all back here. Is 4:55 enough time for everyone? All right, everyone, please rise for the jury.
Okay. I wanted you to help me kind of just understand what I'm looking at 11. And if you could just take a look at all of the pages of 11 and tell me what that is, if it's anything, and if you recognize it.
Can't see the actual numbers of. It looks like page printouts from our old system from 2017. I reckon.
Your old system. There are a series of sort of drop-down menus like you would fill in a PDF with.
Yes.
Okay, so there would be options to click underneath all of those things.
Yes, sir.
And so someone has printed that screen as to what was entered with respect to this case, this one fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge case.
Yes.
Okay. Now on page, and you reviewed these materials when you were preparing your report?
No, because these are the older, I believe these look like they're from a previous version of what I'm using now.
Okay.
That's why I say I can't see the numbers or dates, so I don't know, is this mine?
If you can look there, does that indicate to you that it might have been from 2017?
I honestly, the date yes, it does look like it's 2017 date started. So this is like the original stuff.
Okay, so this would have been the stuff from the original work that Mr. Saucedo did.
Yes, and to be fair, at that time, this system, we really didn't utilize that portion as much. It was more the handwritten notes at that time that he would have been using.
Okay, so I'm going to call your attention to page 3 of Defendant's 11, and I want you to talk to me about this stuff here. This is Mr. Saucedo's notes about the cartridge casing, right?
Mm-hmm. It appears to be, yes, sir.
Okay, but like the report that you mentioned, he's indicated that it's a 40 Smith & Wesson.
Yes, he did.
On that document,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, he did.
Okay, and that would be in keeping with what I'll show you as Defendant's 14, which was the released report that you were referencing earlier.
Yes, correct.
Where he also states that it's a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and you were telling me a moment ago that in the remarks section of Defendant 14, where it says these items will be returned to the evidence receiving section, that your policy has been updated?
Yes, sir.
What's changed now?
If an amended report were to be issued today, it would still say at the top of the report, this is an amended report. But at the bottom in the remarks section, it would have some type of notation that would say, this report has been amended to change this to this, and it replaces the report of the previous one, whatever that date would be, something to that effect.
So explaining and referencing the prior report that's being changed.
Yes, sir.
And that would just be so that there's no confusion about whether we're looking at the same piece of evidence.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Right. Just to be clear, when it says here, there's a 1-1 and it says one fired 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge case, and then E1. 1-1 and E1, are those your internal numbering systems for the evidence?
The 1-1 is the R numbers. The E1 would be what would be on that's the agency number.
Okay, and you're not aware of how the agency does its numbering system or whether there are any other E1s or anything else?
Absolutely no, sir.
Okay.
No.
Now, ultimately, I'm going to show you Defendant's 13. These are your notes from last year, is that right?
Looks like it, yes, sir.
Okay, so this would be your work without Mr. Saucedo's involvement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You did go back and look at Mr. Saucedo's involvement, right?
Yes, sir.
Did it inform your opinion in any way?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that this particular shell casing that we were discussing here, which is in
that one, yes, sir.
Yes, that states Jason, what the 9 from the scene is which evidence number? Okay, about 35. I'm sorry. There we go. So states 35 is the original shell casing.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then states 109. Okay, no, I'm sorry. This is a 380 auto bullet, right?
Correct. It's on fire cartridge, yes.
Your understanding was this was found somewhere in conjunction with the case?
I assume I've never seen it before.
Okay. Now, Mr. Garahand asked you if you could fire a 380 auto in a 9mm gun, and you gave that explanation, right?
Yes, sir.
What about the other way around?
Can a 9mm be fired in a 380?
Right.
No, sir.
That's not possible?
No, sir. It's too large and too long, so it won't fit into the chamber.
Okay. So if somebody has a 380 pistol and they tried to load a 9mm bullet into it to shoot it, what would happen?
It would more than likely jam. If it would even fit in the magazine. If it did, and you tried to cycle it, it would basically lock up.
Okay. Now, when were you made aware that there was a gun that that needed to be compared to that 9mm shell casing in States 35?
I don't have the submission form, but normally on reports we put when it was submitted. So as of August 28th of 2024, so probably about a month, a little less than a month before I issued a report.
And do you know anything about the story of that gun that you were asked to compare to the shell casing? In other words, how it arrived at your laboratory?
I know a little now after the fact, after speaking with Mr. Garahand for pretrial, but before that, no, I did not.
Okay. Now, so at the time that you were doing the comparison, you were unaware of anything other than just, here's a 9mm pistol, it's a Smith & Wesson. We're asking you, can you compare that to a shell casing we recovered at a crime scene?
Believe so. I can't say for certain if I had maybe got an email to work the case and that information. I'm not absolutely certain, but I don't believe so.
Fair to say, there's nothing in your notes or your work about the analysis or the comparisons that you did where you listed that as a factor that would have impacted your analysis?
No, of course. I think I might have notated there was something about Dallas PD or something. Let me see, what was that?
So you've since come to learn that a gun was in Dallas for some time and then came to San Antonio for some time, but never just got linked up with this case or the shell casing until not even a year ago.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when you did your analysis, you took, was it the same brand of ammunition?
No. Let me find out. Just forgive me, these computer printouts that are a little bit harder to read than when they're on the screen. Actually, yes, I did use the same brand of ammunition.
Which is Blazer?
Blazer, yes, sir.
Blazer 9mm Luger ammunition?
Yes.
Okay. So, and you did that to just try and eliminate as many variables as you can from your analysis, right?
Yes.
Because the way that a firing pin indents, say, a Winchester 9mm round might be different than the way it impacts a Blazer round.
Yes, there can be very slight variations, but there can be variations. So just to alleviate that, when possible, if we have our own ammunition collection, we prefer to use ammunition that, from our reference, that is as similar or close to as possible to any questioned evidence. That does not mean that if they submitted unfired evidence that I couldn't use it. We just prefer to use our own ammunition because we know there's no previous markings on it.
Okay. And so we understand from that idea that there are variables that can affect our ability to say things with a lot of certainty about how a primer is indented by a firing pin.
Yes.
Okay. And so you ruled out this gun as being the source of that spent shell casing based on what you call class characteristics, right?
Yes.
So no microscopes are involved in this kind of work.
Well, there is microscopes involved, but they're just not a high power, and we're not comparing individual comparisons.
Sure, you're like we were having trouble reading the word
Yes.
laser on that
Absolutely.
showcase.
Yes, sir.
The microscope could help with that kind of stuff, right?
Yes, sir.
That's the level of magnification we're talking about.
Yes, as a matter of fact, if you notice the photo that's still on the screen, it says micro B. That stands for microscope B. That's the microscope that I use. And F14X means it's 14 times power.
Okay, gotcha. So, in terms of the variables that can affect the primer indentation, you're familiar with guns. You've been out to a range and fired multiple rounds through a gun, I'm sure, many times.
Yes.
And you've probably experienced the frustration any gun user has experienced where you buy a brand new box of ammunition and a round doesn't go off.
Yes.
So there are variabilities in the manufacture of guns, of ammunition, sorry.
There can be, yes, sir.
And that could include how the primer is seated, or whether the primer has been exposed to corrosion before it got put in the box, or
Yes, sir.
probably a lot of other things.
Yes.
Okay. And so, when you're talking about ruling things out on a class level, you said that caliber is one possible way to rule it out on a class level.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, like, for example, if we have a 9mm cartridge, or I'm sorry, we had a 40 caliber cartridge casing and a 9mm pistol, you don't have to do any additional work to say that on a class level, that's not possible. But you said that also things like primer could be, right? A class of characteristics.
The fire pin shape and the aperture shape is what I was referring to, yes, sir.
Okay. And so, like, for example, some guns are manufactured in such a way that they leave a distinct signature on their firing pin, right?
Yes, so there are some that if you were to see that firing pin, because you're accustomed to seeing certain makes and models, you test fire, you look at the tests. There are times where you can pick up a cartridge case and go, oh, that's from this type of gun.
But not all guns are that way, right?
No, sir. And actually, most of them aren't.
Most of them aren't. In fact, some gun manufacturers have been criticized publicly and in lawsuits because they don't make their firing pins more distinct, right?
There's a debate about that, yes, sir.
Okay. And I mean, part of that debate goes to just generally the idea of using a firing pin indentation like a fingerprint, right? There's some criticism of that.
In that respect of, I believe what you're referring to is micro stamping the imprint. What they're referring to is putting a serial number very microscopically on the firing pin. So if it were to strike a object, you would have that serial number and say, oh, well, this was fired in that gun. It's a little more complicated than that. And also, they don't, part of that debate, which I don't really want to get into the debate, but part of that is they don't last very long.
Understood. Yeah. So, okay, when we're talking about we're talking about a mechanical tool. A gun is a mechanical tool, right?
Yes, sir.
And all of the parts of the gun are working against each other and principles like friction and so forth, because it's metal rubbing up against metal to make this thing work.
Yes, sir, correct.
And so guns have ordinary wear and tear as a consequence of that, right?
Yes, sir.
If you take a shotgun and you open it up for the first time out of the box, it's probably very stiff and difficult to open. But if you've been shooting it for 40 years, it could just almost fall open with a tap of the hammer, right?
Yes, and that wear and tear will also add to the individual accidental, what we call accidental marks on it. Yes, sir.
And so as a gun wears, that can impact how the firing pin works, correct?
Potentially, yes, sir.
Okay, and then other things might impact how a firing pin works on a specific occasion, like if the gun's shot upside down or sideways or at an unusual angle other than what a marksman normally goes for, right?
Potentially, yes, sir.
If a gun was dropped or damaged in some way, that could also impact how the firing pin works.
Good, yes, sir.
As far as corrosion is concerned, these are, again, metal objects, right? I mean, apart from what, the grip, everything on that gun is metallic in some way.
Yes, they're usually stainless steel. Yes, sir.
And so a gun owner has to take care of the gun, oil it, lubricate it, remove powder and other debris on a routine basis, or else the gun might start to rust or jam, right?
It depends, maybe not necessarily rust so much, but continued dirt and debris and stuff may make it operate not properly, yes.
Okay. And certain materials may start to cling to aspects of the gun because there's oil and grease on it, dirt, grime, gritty material, sand, those kinds of things could get in it, right?
Yes, sir.
And so if something has been sitting for a very long time and has not been cleaned or maintained, you would expect to see some kind of problem with the gun generally, right?
Depends on the environment.
Okay.
If it's just sitting in a drawer, I doubt any change is going to take place.
And to be fair, you don't know a lot about the story of this gun and where it's been.
No, sir.
Okay. And that was not something that was reported to you when you did your analysis?
No, sir.
Okay. And those kinds of issues related to corrosion or grime or issues with that could affect the firing pin's operation?
They could, but it's also one of, like you spoke of, the many variables. Those are also variables that we consider in parts of our examination.
Okay. So am I to understand that when you're looking at states 138, is that the exhibit on the, this one? Yes, sir. Yes. When you're looking at 138, the thing that you discussed at length, Mr. Garahan, was the breech face impression, which is the sort of broader ring around the really fine pointed indentation on the primer, right?
Yes, sir.
The fact that the one on the right seems to have a larger gouge dug out of it on the right, you didn't seem to mention that. That doesn't seem to be a major point of interest for you?
No, it is. It's actually clerical. It would be easy to show the actual firing pin of the weapon to explain why there is a unique shape to the test that isn't being shown.
Okay. Did you do any disassembly of this gun?
No, sir.
Okay. So that wasn't something that you notated in your report?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you aware that the gun had been entered into the database up in Dallas?
Possibly. I think there was some notation on the paperwork, possibly. I can't say yes or no, but it is a possibility, yes, sir.
And that didn't play a role in your analysis at all?
No, sir.
For them to have made that entry in the database, they would have had to fire an exemplar shell themselves.
Yes.
Up in Dallas, right?
Yes, sir. In order to enter a cartridge into the, if it for the gun, they would test fire it. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you have not seen that exemplar spent shell casing?
No, sir.
Okay. And you didn't review the notes that were in the database about that spent shell casing in your analysis? You based it off the exemplar you made firing the gun in your laboratory?
Correct. Yes, sir.
In a case where there's this much time between when a gun is alleged to have been fired, when the gun was seized, and when the gun finally got tested, would it be helpful scientifically to see what an exemplar taken from the gun earlier in time, closer to the time of the shooting, would reveal?
Not necessarily, especially not in this case, no, sir.
Well, you say not necessarily, but it would be a variable, right?
Potentially, the changes to firearms have been shown study after study to be very minimal over time, lacking some form of forced change.
But you're aware that there are also studies that have said that analysis based on primer indentation are unreliable because they're difficult to repeat, right?
Yes, sir.
So, your field isn't without some scientific criticism.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll pass the links.
Say, you're on? Yes.
Mr. Pendleton, you were, when Mr. Hunter was asking you a question about the indention and everything, firing pin, you stated that you could show with that particular firearm, I guess, a unique characteristic of this firearm. Can you explain that to the jury?
Yes, sir. With the Smith & Wesson M&P, I mentioned earlier that aperture, that circle that the firing pin sticks out of. In addition to that, there is call it a scoop or a piece of metal that is taken away from the breech face area around it, or in a portion of it. And that is put there by Smith & Wesson, they claim, to help assist in debris when you fire the weapon, fire powers and stuff to not collect, gives it an escape route, so to speak. And when they put that there, when you fire a cartridge case into it, when I mentioned earlier, the softer primer kind of flows back into the crevice area. Well, it also fills in that area. I'm trying to find a hard word to explain, but it basically makes this shape here on the end, if you can see what I'm seeing. And that tells me that this cartridge case, and I know that for a fact because I fired it from that gun, this is a test, was fired a make and model type of Smith & Wesson. There's also a Glock that can have similar distinction because they do the same manufacturing technique, but that is not on the questioned evidence. Another change here, and I failed to mention it earlier, I apologize, but the firing pin itself, if you were to look at it from a profile, the test is what we call a hemispherical. Think of a globe, you cut it in half, it'll look like a bowl. That's the tip of the firing pin. You think of it like a bowl shape. Whereas the questioned one has more of a flattened surface. That's what we call a circular firing pin. It's a little tapered on the edges, but the base of it is more flattened. So these are class characteristics that are different from each other.
And with this particular weapon, did you notate any corrosion or any other variables that Mr. Hunter had mentioned?
No, sir.
Thank you. We'll pass it over, Mr. Hunter.
Very briefly. You didn't notate that there wasn't corrosion either, to be fair.
Correct.
And you mentioned that there are certain aspects of this manufacturer's breech face that are significant to you, but you don't notate those in your report either, correct?
Well, actually I do, but you have to be an examiner understanding the notations. Like if you look at my notations, I'd say the firing pin type. I have to look at my notes, but I'm more likely to call it a teardrop because we generally see that shape, and that's kind of the shape that examiners have called it. Personally, I think it looks more like a comet, but we go with teardrop. Whereas this other one, I would notate that it's circular. Also with the firing pin impression, in my notes, you will notice that it will say M&P because that's the type of firing pin impression that I typically see in an M&P, whereas this other one, the notation for it would say circular. So it is notated, but it's very difficult to understand what those notes mean unless you're accustomed to writing those notes.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that it's a teardrop shape on the right-handed breech face, right?
Yes.
Now, on the left-handed one, that is the one that was collected as questioned evidence, there's also more of a cutout, if you will, or an indentation trailing off to the right in the same direction as on the 2024 test, right?
Mm-hmm. Those actually are not from that type of that's actually part of the firing pin. It's called the firing pin drag. And they don't always have to be the same, even from make and model, the same make and model. And what's happening is when the firing pin strikes the primer, it's going to stay stuck inside it a little bit. And so when it's getting kicked out of the weapon, it's going to kind of scrape its way out of there. And it leaves this marking here and this marking here on this one. So it's called firing pin drag.
So your belief is that the shell casing on the left is exhibiting firing pin drag, and the shell
class characteristics.
Okay, well, I understand they exhibit different class characteristics, but you were specifically calling our
Oh, yes, they're both.
aspect of it, they
They're
both
both,
have
they
drag.
both have drag, yes, sir.
Okay, so the degree that how many total class characteristics are you supposed to go through in doing a comparison?
You know, honestly, there's no set number. No one's ever asked that, but generally, it's the caliber, the shape of the firing pin, and characteristics of the breech face.
So
There's a number of different types of shapes to look for on the breech face, but yes.
So the things that you believe would fall into that category of class characteristic may differ from another examiner.
No.
Okay, but there's no set number of things that could be a class characteristic.
There's not a set number, but I would, in other words, another examiner would not look at this and say that that's not a class characteristic. Little that I know of anyway.
Okay, well, it sounds like it's a fairly broad definition, right? Would you agree, the idea of class characteristic?
It obviously, to be fair, it depends on what the item of evidence is to be looking at to consider, yes, sir.
Okay, and fundamentally at its core, because these are observations that aren't using extremely high magnification examination, there is a degree to which the training and experience of the examiner plays a role.
Absolutely. And to be fair, everything that I do is subjective, meaning it's my opinion.
That's limits.
No question, Your Honor.
All right, since witness excused is subject for recall.
Excused by the state, Your Honor.
Excused by the defense.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with anyone during the pendency of this trial. All right, and state, is that your last witness for today?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have you back here tomorrow. I know Frank has a chance to park. We can go off the record. And remember previously what I told you about the number of jurors who will be coming up? The same number of jurors when you all were brought up are going to be the same number of jurors for tomorrow. All right? And remember my previous instructions. Do not do any investigation. Do not even think about this case outside this outside this courtroom. Does everyone understand? Do not deliberate. Do not talk about it. Everything that you need to know about this case comes from inside the courtroom. All right? All right. And I don't think there's any street closures, but you can Google that and check that to make sure that there are no more street closures downtown. I think, well, I know the basketball game is done. I don't know if people